Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab. I am your host, Dr. Leslie Joseph. Thank you so much for joining me. And we have been talking about Palestine for the last couple of months, trying to get an understanding of what life is like in Palestine, not because of the war going on, but just in general. Because on this podcast, we talk about environmental justice, and from what you can see from the last few episodes, there is a lot of environmental injustice occurring in Palestine. And so we went through it, we talked through it, just a few of the issues. There's so many issues that go far beyond the environment that need to be addressed and discussed. But I'm not qualified. I keep telling you, I'm not qualified to talk about those kinds of things. I can only talk about the environment. So that's what we've been talking about. And I was very clear. I wanted you to know that all those things we talked about have been happening long before this current war broke out. Long before this current hostility has been taking place, all of these environmental injustices have been occurring. And so I've been spending a lot of time trying to make that point, make it clear that living in Palestine means living with consistent environmental injustice throughout your lifetime. That's what it means. But we're going to shift a little bit on this episode because there is a war going on, and that war is causing catastrophic environmental damage in the Gaza Strip. And so we can't ignore that. We can't just pretend like this isn't happening and this isn't going to impact generations to come. So on this episode, I want to talk about the current war, the impact that it's having, and the ways in which the people that live there will be impacted for decades, generations to come because of this type of war that's being conducted in Gaza. And so that's what we're talking about. Stay tuned. This is the Environmental Justice Lab. Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab. I'm Dr. Joseph. Thank you so much for listening. There is a war going on in the Gaza Strip. By now, you should know all about that war. You should know that that war has killed over 36,000 people. That most of those people are women and children. You should know by now that this war has been going on for the last 7 months, and as a result of the war, whole cities, whole towns have been completely demolished, that the infrastructure has been completely destroyed, that life is not livable in this area. And you probably already know, if you've been paying attention, that the last remaining population center in the southern part of Gaza, called Rafah, is about to be invaded by the Israeli forces. It's going to happen. They've been talking about it. They're planning it. No matter what Biden is saying about what he's going to do or not do, red lines, all that stuff, that's fine. He's talking. It's an election year. We get it. You have to draw the line somewhere, and you're trying to draw the line at Rafah, but we know what's coming. The forces are moving in, and it's going to have some catastrophic impacts. We already know that. And so this war has had a devastating toll on the people, the property, and what I want to talk about is the environment, the environmental impact of this war. Because I just read that the United Nations Environment Program is currently investigating the environmental impact of this war. They're going in and they're assessing what the fallout has been and will be from this war. And their preliminary stuff is not looking good. It's not looking good at all. So if you read the articles, it will put some links in the description. Here are just some facts. These are just facts, just basic facts. So as of, I believe it's January of this year, 100,000 cubic meters of sewage has been dumped into the Mediterranean Sea. For those of you who don't do metric units, that's 26.4 million gallons of sewage into the Mediterranean Sea. 22.9 million tons of debris all over the Gaza Strip, from the aerial assaults, from the bombing, debris everywhere, rubble everywhere. Now, this is not just like construction debris that you would find on a construction site. These are buildings, these are apartments, these are all kinds of appliances and equipment and electrical devices everywhere. So you have heavy metals in the debris. You have asbestos in the debris, other hazardous chemicals in the debris. And let's not forget, people, human remains, human bodies in the debris. They're in there. That's how much waste, how much solid waste is being generated or has been generated from this war since January. 281,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions from the first 60 days of the war have been emitted, from the bombing, from all the assaults. They're talking about millions and millions of tons of greenhouse gas, climate change related gas emissions just from the first 2 months of the war, fueling climate change. This war is fueling climate change, and it's ongoing. That was back in January. It's May now. I promise you, those numbers are much, much higher. And don't forget when the war started, I don't know if you caught this, but the Israeli defense minister promised, and he followed through. He promised he was cutting off food, he was cutting off electricity, he was cutting off power, fuel, everything to the strip. He said nothing's getting in. We are not going to allow them to have any kind of life whatsoever. And because of that, it's not just that you're not eating. It's also that your infrastructure doesn't work. Your facilities don't work. So now your wastewater treatment plants, they're not working. They're not online. Your water treatment plants, they're not online. You're trying to produce electricity, can't do it. So you can't actually do anything to keep your environment clean. So that wastewater doesn't get treated, dumped into the Mediterranean Sea. That water doesn't get treated, you're drinking it, or you're not having any at all. And so that's compromising the health of everybody that lives there. Not just militants, not just military outposts or operations. Everyone is suffering under that kind of policy. And don't forget about the soil contamination, because this is a agricultural land where they farm and they grow and they have livestock, and this is how their economy functions. All the chemicals from the bombing, white phosphorus, all these explosives, they're all over the land, all in the soil. And these chemicals contaminate whatever you're trying to grow. So even if you think you can make it somehow and keep some of your land to produce some food for yourself to eat, it's not going to be good. It's going to be contaminated and poisoned from the impacts of the war. And so these are just the basic facts. No hyperbole, no commentary, no opinion. This is what we can all agree to. This is what's happening on the ground in Gaza. And we know that the vast majority of the people who are suffering are civilians. They're not militants. There's no army. There's no military base that they're attacking. These are civilians, people who had nothing to do with any of the hostilities that have been taking place in that area, in Israel, and anywhere else. These are the ones that are suffering. These are the people who are suffering. And so, what are the impacts to them specifically? I wrote some of them down because I didn't want to forget any of the ones that I could think of. I'm sure there's a lot more. But we'll start from the beginning. Starvation. You're starving. You're hungry because there's no food. It's a famine. And usually when we talk about famines, we talk about famines because there's a drought, because there's some crop failure, because there's some political instability and things aren't getting in to a region to feed the people. But that's not what's happening here. This is a deliberate, intentional impact that is being brought upon the civilian population in Gaza. It's on purpose. You know, the UN is saying that starvation is being used as a weapon of war, that it's not just a result of the military operations, but is actually a function of the military operation. Like, that's the point, is to starve the people, starve the children, starve the babies. Starvation. Another one, dehydration. So where are you going to get water from anyway? There's no place to get water. The treatment plants aren't running. They're not functional. The underground wells are contaminated, right? People don't have the water that they need, and so they're dehydrated. So that's happening to the civilians in Gaza. Waterborne diseases. So when you are exposed to contaminated water, or when you're forced to use unclean, unsanitary sanitation facilities, or you're just crammed all together with no medicine and no food and nothing to take care of yourself, no way to wash your hands or to take a shower, diseases spread. That happens all the time. That's why we encourage people to wash their hands after they use the bathroom, and you shower and you brush your teeth and you do all these things to protect yourself, to be healthy. You can't do that. There's no water. There are no sanitation facilities. There's no place to go. And so there's an increase in disease. It's spreading. And the problem with the disease spread is that the hospitals, if there's any standing, are undermanned, under-resourced, under everything. They don't have what they need to actually take care of the people who are sick, because they're taking care of people who are injured from all of the bombing. And so that's the problem. We haven't even talked about the healthcare system. I mean, I guess that's in line with the environment. We're talking about water and food and air, but what about the healthcare situation? Where would you go if your stomach hurts and they're bringing in children with their legs blown off and their arms severed? You know what? Your diarrhea and your cholera and your other illnesses will probably have to wait until they can figure out how to save this person's life who just got rescued from a building that collapsed on them because it was bombed during the war. It's a big problem. It's a big problem. The air, you can't breathe the air. Those buildings come down, the dust comes up, asbestos comes up, all of these airborne chemicals come up. There's no way to make sure the air is clean and breathable. There are no N95 masks available. There's no place to go where there isn't a consistent haze of pollution moving across where you are. There's nothing like that. It's awful. And that's what everyday people living in Gaza right now have to deal with because of the war and the campaign and the assaults and the bombardments, everything that's happening in the area. So you have no water, no place to go to the bathroom, no place to shower. The air's not breathable. You can't get medical care if you're sick. This whole environment is completely unlivable. You can't do it. And there's nowhere to go. The crossings are all blocked off and blockaded. You can't go to another country. You can't fly out. There's no airport where you can fly out of the Gaza Strip to go back to some other country. There's no place to go. There's nothing you can do. And so these are the kinds of things that are happening right now as a result, a direct result of the way this military campaign is being put forth in the Gaza Strip. There's no other way around it. The environmental impacts, the environmental destruction is going to last far beyond anyone who's living there right now. I can promise you that in 30, 40, 50, 100 years, we're going to still have these problems. These problems don't get solved in 2 to 3 years. And it takes billions of dollars to deal with just one of these issues. Who's going to rebuild? Who's going to clean up all of that waste, all of that trash, all the rubble, all of the facilities that are destroyed? Who's going to do that? Who's willing to support a Palestinian population who is living in these conditions to give them some semblance of a society? Who's going to build the schools, the universities, the churches, the religious institutions? Who's going to do that? The hospitals, the treatment plants. Who's going to do it? The roads. You can't even drive around. Who's going to build the roads? It's a problem. It's a big problem. And as I was looking into this and doing some more research, there's a word that I learned that I want to share with you, that I want you to learn also, because it's an important word that we need to use when these types of things happen in these areas to these people under these circumstances. And the word is ecocide. Ecocide, right? Some people define ecocide as a mass destruction of the environment, where you cause severe environmental damage on an industrial scale. You impact large amounts of people. An ecocide. Now, there's an actual legal definition for ecocide. And there was a panel that convened from all over the world to identify what ecocide actually is. This is their definition. They say that ecocide is defined as unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there is a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. They call that ecocide. And if you look at what's happening in the Gaza Strip right now, there is no other way to describe it than an ecocide. You know, people are debating, is it a genocide? Are these war crimes, crimes against humanity? You know, these international kind of definitions, people are going back and forth, and that's fine. You can keep talking about those things and, you know, arguing about if it is or if it isn't, where's the intent, all those things, fine. I'm not an international human rights expert or lawyer or anything like that. I do know the environment, though. And I do know what widespread, severe, long-term environmental damage looks like. I know what it looks like. And this is a textbook example of that. The people who are responsible for determining how things go in Gaza as it relates to the war effort, they know that they're destroying the environment. They're doing it intentionally. They know that the infrastructure cannot sustain life the way they've left it. They're doing it intentionally. They know that there is, and I'll quote the definition, knowledge that there is substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment. They know that. A substantial likelihood. It's part of the mission. To rid the people living there of any ability to live. So you're destroying treatment facilities that protect the environment. You're destroying healthcare facilities that keep people healthy. You are deliberately restricting food from getting in. You know that your bombing, the way you're doing your bombing and the way you're doing your assaults and bombardments are going to destroy the land, destroy the water resources, destroy everything in its path. You know that. I know that. We see that. And so I have the utmost confidence in declaring that an ecocide is occurring in Gaza right now. I might be late to the party. I'm sure there's environmental lawyers have been saying this for weeks and weeks and weeks and months and months and months. I just learned the word. Okay, I just learned it. I read the definition. I looked at the reports, and it's clear that that's happening. And there's no way around it. And what's interesting is they're trying to get it to be listed as a crime, an international war crime alongside, crimes against humanity and genocide and these other things. They're trying to get it listed in that category. I don't know how it's going. I know the EU, the European Union, has passed laws that declare ecocide as a war crime. And I think they're trying to leverage that in the Russia-Ukraine war that's going on. But it's not on an international kind of UN level yet. But I know there's a push for that because clearly you shouldn't be able to do these kind of things deliberately and purposefully. It should be outlawed. It should not be a way that war is conducted. You shouldn't be able to do this. You shouldn't. And so I'm calling it an ecocide. You don't have to. It's up to you. But I'm going to call it an ecocide because that's what it is. And it's going to take generations and generations to recover from this. If the war stopped today, they opened up all the borders, flooded the Gaza Strip with billions of dollars of aid and workers, you wouldn't recover from this for probably another 20, 30 years. It wouldn't be possible. It just wouldn't be. That's how much damage is occurring. And when it comes to things like water and air, you can't just sweep it up like it's dust on the ground. Like you have to actually go in and treat and remediate and extract and find ways to deal with that pollution and those constituents in the water, in the soil, in the air. You can't do it. It takes a decade just to clean up some of these sites in the U.S. You're not going into the Gaza Strip and cleaning anything up in less than 30, 40, 50 years. You won't do it. And so I'm going to call it that. And one last thing that I think is really important that I think we don't talk about enough. And that is, obviously, you have wars. People are trying to achieve certain objectives with war. There are political arrangements you can make, things you can do. You can draw borders and lines and try to figure things out and come to some peace agreement. Okay, fine. When it comes to environmental damage and climate change, it doesn't care about your borders. It doesn't care about your agreements. It doesn't care about your arrangements. It doesn't care about what you think needs to be done. That damage, that will travel far beyond wherever you're concerned about, and it doesn't care about what you've chosen to do. It just doesn't. Here's a quote from an article that talks about this very specific thing. It says, climate change does not recognize borders or political arrangements, and environmental degradation in Palestine will make its way to Israel. For instance, Ashkelon, one of Israel's desalination plants, that's a plant where you treat seawater and make it drinkable. Water from the Mediterranean Sea, you're processing it, you're purifying it so you can drink it and consume it. It's actually a very expensive process, and it's a very expensive way of getting clean water. But when you don't have any other sources, that's what you do. So Ashkelon, one of Israel's desalination plants, has been shut down several times in the past few years due to pollution from Gaza. Why? Because the Mediterranean Sea, where they're dumping all the sewage in Gaza, is also beside Israel. And so when they pull that water into their plant, that sewage is still in it. As pollution in the Strip is likely to increase due to this current conflict, Israel's water security will be jeopardized. Without an immediate long-term ceasefire and long-term plans that centralize the environment in any peace talks, give the Palestinian communities the ability to protect their environment and stop the Israeli government from destroying the environment, it is not only Palestinians who will suffer. Even Israel's climate policy cannot protect it from a cross-border environmental disaster. That's what was written in the news regarding the environment. That whatever environmental damage you see will impact all of the neighboring countries, and that includes Israel. So even if you're not concerned about what happens in Gaza, if you're concerned about your own environment, your own water security, your own air, you would do your best to not destroy it in the neighboring country, because it's going to travel to you. And so now your treatment plant is compromised because your water source is contaminated because of the way things are being done in the Gaza Strip. It's not good. It's not good at all. And that should be a lesson to everybody, everywhere around the world. You don't just think that whatever's happening in the environment in one particular country, one particular town or village, only affects that one particular town or one particular village. It doesn't. It travels. Emissions from China comes to the U.S. Emissions from the U.S. go to South America. It goes to Europe. It goes to Africa. It's a global problem. You pollute the Mediterranean Sea, you're polluting the water source for all of those countries that rely on that sea as source water for their own populations. That's what you do when you allow for it to be contaminated in one part of the world. And so we need to think more broadly about what kind of damage we're doing to the environment, what kind of damage we're doing to our resources with these conflicts, with these wars, with these hostilities. Because it's not going to stay in one place. It never has, and it never will, and it won't. And we are all part of the same global ecosystem. And we need to be aware of that when we see what's going on in other parts of the world. So I don't know if you even care about what's going on in Palestine, if you're even concerned about the other issues that are going on there, the death toll, the political instability, all of the fighting and conflicts and wars and everything going on there. That's fine. If you love the environment, you wouldn't want to see this either. You wouldn't want to see treatment facilities destroyed. You wouldn't want to see raw sewage pumped into the sea. You wouldn't want to see air being contaminated with falling, crumbling buildings that are being bombed with all of these pollutants entering into the atmosphere. You wouldn't want any of that. And so that's where we are right now in Palestine. We know about all of the historical issues that continue to persist, but we also know that this current conflict, this current war, is going to exacerbate everything we talked about before previously, and going into the future, it's going to cause considerable harm to generations of people, generations of families. There are babies being born right now during this conflict. If they survive, by the time they're my age, they'll be very well aware of why things are the way they are. And the damage that's been done, they'll still be dealing with it when their kids are born. That's how long this kind of stuff takes. That's the problem. And so, as we think about this war, as we think about this conflict, as we think about what it would take to come to some type of ceasefire, some type of end to the hostility, some way of stopping all the damage and destruction and the death, we're going to have to start thinking about how we're going to even approach some type of recovery, some type of remediation, some type of cleanup to at least bring some sense of life back to this area, back to this one little strip of land that used to house over 2 million people. We got to do something. And we got to do it quickly because it's not getting any better. And environmental damage does not get fixed overnight or over a weekend or over a year or over a decade. It takes a long time. We need to stop it now. Right now. And that's our episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Environmental Justice Lab, where we are for the people and for the planet. I will see you next time.